Could Al Horford be going to the New York Knicks? Tim Bontemps thinks so. I do not. We're also going to be hitting on whether Giannis would be a logical trade candidate for the Celtics per Brian Windhorst's recent report or a recent discussion point. And we're going to talk about whether the Celtics need a rim runner. We're doing all that on today's episode of Taylor Talk Celtics. And as usual, I'm joined by my homie, compadre, co-host in crime, Mr. Billy Calabrese. What's poppin', Billy?
What's up, everybody?
Yo, lots to talk about, man. The off season's in full swing for Celtics Nation. Obviously, there's still the NBA Finals to go, and we can talk about that later in the week. But for right now, there just seems to be a lot of rumor mill kind of discussion points that all need addressing. And I think we need to start with the Tim Bontemps discussion from the Hoop Collective, which released on Sunday from obviously Windhorst and ESPN. I was going to read you the quote because this got to me straight from the jump, and I posted this on socials, across all socials actually, and the resounding response was, yeah, that's not happening. And everybody had their own reasons for that. Some people were a lot more measured. Some people were just like, Al wouldn't do that to Boston. However you want to deal with it, fine. The quote's quite lengthy, but I'll read it verbatim. Al Horford is a free agent. I don't think at this point it makes a lot of sense for Horford to be back in Boston. Maybe he will be, but given there are things with the Celtics, well, I'm sure he just means, the Jason Tatum injury, the cap space issues and stuff. I think he's now much more in play than he might have been a month ago. Fair, really. Horford is a longtime friend of Towns and has played with him on the Dominican national team for a long time. I've heard people push back on that, saying they've never actually played together for the DR team. If the Knicks go and get Al Horford this summer, I think he would be an unbelievable fit on New York's roster. That would be a team that could beat the Pacers next year. That would put them in the mix for the Eastern Conference. Okay, fair. I mean, look, we all know the value that Horford brings. We all know what he does for this Celtics team, both in the locker room and on the floor. Even at his current age, he's still made a huge impact this season. The question is, do you see him leaving Boston? And I want to kind of look at this from both sides. And then B, is New York, if he does choose to leave Boston, is that the most logical landing spot for him? So, Billy, I've had a long time to internalize this. I posted this yesterday before bed, kind of slept on it, reread it, got my thoughts together. You've had less time, but and you haven't really spoke on this yet. So I definitely want your take first. Where do you kind of stand on Al Horford going to the Knicks if potentially he decides to leave the Celtics?
So this is where I just get really annoyed by the media because this isn't a report. This isn't something that's rumored to happen. This isn't something that even we think the Knicks would even be interested in. This is Tim Bontemps thinking, oh, these guys are both Dominican. That'd be cool for them to play together. It'd be a good pickup for the Knicks. Would it though? They already have three bigs. Tibbs does not use his bench. And you're going to tell me that Al Horford at 40 years old is going to play for Tom Thibodeau.
That was my biggest question mark, right? Al wouldn't be able to sustain the minutes. He's also far too good for a 12 to 15 minute a night rotation spot. So there'd have to be some form of give and take here. And the question remains, is Thibodeau even going to be the coach of the Knicks next season? I mean, that's a genuine discussion point amongst Knicks fans right now. And that's for them to decide, right? There's a fickleness to that discussion in the sense that Tibbs came when that team was a dumpster fire and he's took them to an Eastern Conference Finals and improved them every year. That's a Knicks problem. In
And is
terms of
Cat going
whether
to be there?
and is Cat going to be there? We all saw the reports come out yesterday about his defense and how frustrated the rest of the team were with just his inability to grasp the importance of calling out defensive coverages and actually being willing to stick to those coverages. Again, a Knicks problem. From a Celtic standpoint, though, I think you're right. Why would Horford leave Boston where his family settles, his kids are in school, he's got a very clear and defined role both on and off the floor, to go to a Knicks team that right now we're not sure if it's in flux or not. We're not sure whether it's going to be the same roster coming back next year. I think it should be, personally. I think that this roster got pieced together quite last minute in terms of the Towns trade right before training camp. They haven't really had a full summer to work as a unit. Internal improvement could help them bridge a bit of the gap that we saw during the postseason. Again, that's for a Knicks podcast to deal with. What I am saying is, though, there's a world where I feel like Horford could look at the Knicks and be like, well, I could contend there, but the fit just doesn't make any sense to me. Even if he played primarily as a four, it's where does his minutes kind of come from and where do they stop? because there's no way you want to put that sort of mileage onto Horford at 40. You're risking a major injury.
Yeah, and I just don't see if let's say he is gonna go ring hunting. I mean, he should look into it. I don't even mind the idea of Al Horford just going getting another ring somewhere else. But why would it be there? Why wouldn't it be somewhere where he would be a better fit? Like, I hate to say it, but it's like the Lakers, it's like the Rockets. It's teams that are a little bit more competitive, a little bit more of a chance. I mean, the Knicks kind of stumbled their way into the Eastern Conference Finals. Now, we helped that. We had a lot of injuries, whatever you want to say, but nobody really had the Knicks as title contenders. They didn't beat a championship caliber team the entire season, but they had this magical playoff run that obviously Indiana was able to extinguish pretty easily. So I would say there's probably 5, 6 other teams that could use the services of Al Horford more than the Knicks that would make them more contenders.
And this is where the question then comes, like, do you think Al Horford leaves this summer? And if he does, is it to retire or is it to go play elsewhere? Right? Because if you look at Horford in terms of a veteran guy, clearly wants to contend, clearly wants to be a champion, has one ring, came into the league with 2 championships in college. We spoke about this previously, where like the ideal for Horford would be to bow out as a 2-time NBA champion. That's not going to be a case in Boston this year. Like, it's pretty clear they're not going to be a contending team without Jason Tatum. And some people will push back, like Jalen Brown will ensure that they're in the mix. They'll probably be in the mix, but they won't be a contending team. Now, at that point, if you're Horford and you're looking at this and being like, well, the next time this team's ready to contend, I might be 41, 42. Will I even still be in the league? How important is another ring to me, to my legacy, to being able to kind of like cement that Hall of Fame spot or whatever it may be? If that's the case, do you think he retires and just be like, I call it a day. I don't want to play for anywhere but Boston, and clearly it's going to be kind of like I'm coming back for a paycheck rather than to, does he retire, or do you think he looks around the league with some kind of wanting glances at a role on a Lakers, on a Rockets, on a Knicks in terms of what Bontemps is saying? Maybe people have said like maybe he goes back to Atlanta, but I don't see that because that's less of a chance to contend than you've got in Boston. I don't understand why you would do that. A Florida team could make sense, maybe. The Magic, maybe, but their issues are at the guard position, and then even Miami's issues are primarily at the guard position too. They haven't been able to replace Dragic since 2021. Everyone they plug into that guard spot is just not doing the job. There are spots for Horford, but do you see that as a retirement? Do you see him as he's coming back and just kind of playing out the year, helping develop dudes? How do you see it unfolding, man?
I think it's going to be up to Brad. Brad has to build a team that at least can be like a second round or even a conference final threat. If he does that, I think Horford stays. There is no scenario I see where Horford retires. He's going to play basketball next season. It's just, is it going to be with us or somebody else? If for it to be with us, it would have to be something meaningful. And like I said, he has the great advantage. We're in the Eastern Conference. It is not hard to build a team that can at least get to the second round. And I think that would be enough to entice Al to stay.
And this is the problem, right? When you look at the Celtics' current roster, it's good enough right now to be a second round team. The problem is, one, the cap costs, just the luxury tax. You're not paying $500 million for this roster. Unfortunately, I just think that's a logical statement to make. I don't think there's much pushback you can have. There's too many injury concerns. Brown's knees, Drew Holiday getting older, Al getting older. Sam Hauser had them back issues throughout the season, and I think that once you start having back issues, especially as a guy that's based on like the way he needs to square his hips and the movements he needs to make in order to be such a catch and shoot threat on the go, those are a concern. Probably not long term, but definitely short term, a year or two, while he kind of figures out maybe he needs to start doing yoga or whatever it may be. There's a Kristaps Porzingis. We just don't know what's wrong with him. But no matter what, even if he gets better from this mystery illness, there's no faith in him staying healthy throughout a full season and postseason run because there's just no body of work to support that he's capable of that realistically. So there are a lot of questions there in terms of what the Celtics need to do in order to be a team that could realistically be a second round threat, even a conference finals threat. And right now, while the talent's there, the amount of injury concerns and the amount of questions over longevity across multiple dudes, that to me is a bigger kind of worry then can this team make a second round or conference finals? And that's where Brad's going to need to address things before Horford makes a decision. But maybe Horford looks at it and is just like, I'm done. Maybe he's like, maybe me retiring pushes Brad to go and make a move for a new, younger big that can kind of step in and take over. I don't know how it works, but I think that assuming Horford is going to be back is exactly what we did when he signed with Philly. And I understand the money played a huge role in that. But my argument has been, and my pushback there is, the Celtics are probably only going to give him a veteran minimum deal. There will be teams out there that are possibly willing to give him part or all of the MLE, and that's a big jump from a vet min. So if money was the reason he left last time, and this time it's potential championship run plus money, there's a chance that he could look elsewhere around the league too. I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
I do think that the problem a lot of people overlook is, yes, of course, it's the money. It's the big bag of money that he took for Philly. But the reason he left was Kyrie. That team was so miserable and hated each other that if there was even a 1% chance that Kyrie was going to stay, Al Horford was not going to be a part of it. He's too much of an adult in the room. He's not going to put up with children. So I do think that the money did play a role, but there were other teams that could have gave him the money. He went to Philly because he thought they could contend and he wanted to get out of Boston, but all that stems from just that cancerous season.
So with that in mind, I just want to kind of put a bow on this and be like, let's give our predictions: stay, retire, or leave.
I'm a lock for stay. I think
You're a
Brad
lot
will
for stay.
he'll put together a competitive enough team where I was like, this is going to be fun.
Yeah. So I'm 90% in stay, 10% in retire. I don't think he leaves. I think that he either chooses to stay or retire. I think leaving would be the very last. The only way I could see him leave is if the Celtics basically lowballed him on a trade on a contract offer and he felt insulted and he was like, "No, okay, I'm going to bounce." Now, I genuinely hope that that doesn't happen. It's a new ownership group. We don't exactly know how they're going to operate in terms of contract offers, financial management, and stuff like that. But that would be the only way I could see him up and leave was if a contract offer was so lowball. And I don't know how you're going to do that when veteran minimum's the floor anyway. But if he believes he's higher than that, if he believes he deserves a bit more than that, we don't know. But yeah, I'm 90% stay, 10% retire. So I'm pretty much there with you. I do think that Bontemps discussion point, like I don't ever get upset by these things because we do exactly the same on these shows as well. The only difference is they have national attention. So I can get why it's frustrating, but at the same time, it's just generated 15 minutes of discussion points for us. So I never get upset by it. But I also understand the frustration with like, dude, leave Horford alone, stay off our lawn type of energy. You get what I'm saying?
Well, no, it's the Bontemps negativity towards the Celtics that's been a
Yeah,
thing for
I should just
years and
learn to
years
live with
now.
that.
Yeah, he treats covering the Celtics like he's on house arrest, like, like he has a shock collar on and ESPN makes him. I mean, we could only be so lucky to cover the Celtics, but he treats it like, it's, marching through hell. But with him, like I said, take it with a grain of salt. It's for attention. The one thing I will say, the difference between what he said and what Windhorst said, Windhorst is saying something based on a report, based on people he's talking to, things he's hearing. Bontemps is basing it on, oh, these guys would be cool together.
Yeah, and that's the frustrating part, right? But again, like you said, it's kind of animosity towards the Celtics, potentially wanting to see the Knicks improve. And obviously, then the Horford connection is, well, whenever a Celtics player is playing for the Celtics, he's trash. But the minute he's potentially available, look at the impact he can make on teams around the league. And people said that in the comment section on my post on, I think it was on Twitter and Instagram. People had that kind of sentiment. So that is true. And that is probably a big frustration for people. Let's move on to this Windhorse discussion point, though, because Windy kind of set the wheels moving.
You
And
don't know the finger guns, the windy?
I thought you was trying to tell me to take a break, but
No, no.
I know what you mean now. Um, yeah, so if we look at it from the Windhorse perspective, I really like the way he put this. He wasn't saying that the Celtics are going to be a trade candidate for Giannis. It was basically, and this is again, I've used the word logical a lot during this show. What Windhorse is saying is there's not many teams in the NBA that can put a trade package together for Giannis, make that trade, and still have enough depth on that team to be a genuine contender. And the Celtics are one of the few teams that can do so. Realistically, if the Celtics find a way to get out of the second apron and Milwaukee finds a and Milwaukee a second apron team too, Milwaukee would need to get out of the second apron too. You could pretty much do a straight swap Brown for Giannis and then filler draft picks or whatever you need to do. I understand the discussion point. I understand the thought process that goes into what Windy's saying there because it's like, yo, if you look at Miami or any other team, what other teams are interested in Giannis? Miami's been the one that I've seen the most.
Toronto, I mean, the
Toronto,
poutine
yeah. If
platter
you look
from
at all
Toronto.
these other teams, it's like the guys you need to piece together to make an appealing trade offer. There's nothing left once Giannis gets there. He's in a worse situation than he is in Milwaukee right now, if not comparative. In Boston, it's like, well, you're going to land on a team that's still got Derek White, that's still got Jason Tatum when healthy, that's still got potentially Sam Hauser. There's a bunch of dudes that are still, Peyton Pritchard will still be there. There's a bunch of dudes that will still be there when Giannis landed, and that's not going to be an option for many teams around the NBA. So from that standpoint, completely understood it, man.
And he also makes the point of if Giannis has a list, and he hints that he does, that the Celtics would be on that short list. Doesn't mean, we saw with Dame. Dame had a short list too. Doesn't mean that's where he's going to go, but it at least means that you're in the mix and you're in the game. The one thing I would say, I don't think there's any scenario where it's Jalen Brown playing on the Bucks. The Bucks make no sense having Jalen Brown on their team. You're they don't have their own picks. They need picks back. They need young players. They need a complete rebuild. Brown there probably wins them 35, 40 games. That's not what they want to do. What I will say is there's two paths for a potential Celtics Giannis trade. Both are completely unrealistic, unlikely, but as you could say, Dumb and Dumber quote, hey, you're telling me there's a chance though. First one is you trade Jalen Brown to a team like the Spurs, and all those assets that they would have used to get Giannis, you use those for Giannis, like a nice little three-team trade. Brown goes to San Antonio, the number 2 pick, Castle, all that fun stuff goes to Milwaukee, and Giannis goes to Boston, right? Everybody's happy.
That's
Everybody
fair.
gets
Yeah.
what they want. Now, the argument with that one is, well, why wouldn't the Spurs just trade all that stuff for Giannis and keep him for themselves? That is the unanswerable question. That's what I would ask myself if I'm the Spurs. It's like, well, Jalen Brown's cool, but I'd rather have Giannis. The second one is a lot more spicy and a lot more fun. Let's say this is a world where Jalen Brown is having knee surgery this summer, or there's questions about his knee. Is it possible that Derek White has more trade value than Jalen Brown? Is he a Mikal Bridges where you can maybe not get 5 first round picks, but you get like 3? You start trading off him. You trade off Holiday for assets. You trade off Porzingis for stuff. And all that stuff that you combine together, once you're under the second apron, that's what you use to get Giannis. Now you're going to have a completely gutted team, but you are going to have a roster of Tatum when he comes back, Brown, Giannis, probably Al Horford, a re-signed Luke Cornett, and then whichever guy you could have kept out of Hauser, Pritchard, and some of those other guys at the end of the bench.
That's that's the ideal scenario. I also think it's the scenario that then put Giannis in a position where it's like, hey, you get traded now, but you probably have to wait a year for it to be real, like for everything to really click in. I think that you go into a territory then where super teams tend to fail. There's 3 high usage guys that you need to find minutes for that generally do not minutes, touches, sorry, that you need to find touches for that generally doesn't work out too well. Right. And I think that Giannis is grown enough that he'd be willing to sacrifice. We know Tatum's willing to sacrifice, and we've seen Brown sacrifice. So I'm not saying it couldn't work. I'm just not sold on how that fit would be because then you'd be super big for one. Like you'd have arguably Pritchard as your starting guard, Brown at the 2, Giannis at like what Tatum at the 3, Giannis at the 4, and then whoever plug in whoever here at the 5. You'd really desperately need a stretch big there just because of Giannis's get to the rim kind of game, Brown being in the mid range, and then not knowing what version of Tatum you're going to get back at the beginning of things. You'd need a stretch 5, and they're hard to come by, especially reliable stretch 5s. It could work though. I mean, it'll be some
It'd be pretty
2K
nasty.
shit, but it'll be nasty, dude. Like, yeah, I don't know if Joe would be the guy to coach that team though. Not with the current system in place. Joe would have to completely change his system.
And I think it would be a lot of Giannis at the 5, to be honest with you. I think that's
Yeah,
what
that's
we're
fair.
eventually gonna have to evolve to anyway. But let's say Tatum does miss all of next year. You're telling me that a Brown, Horford, Cornette, Giannis team can't make at least the Eastern Conference Finals or even the
No,
finals?
for sure they could, for sure. And I'm not saying they're a championship team, but I think they're enough to A, keep Horford interested in sticking around, and B, be a real threat. And then you plug Tatum back in the year after and they're championship favorites. Again, though, there's a lot more rim pressure in that rotation, and Joe would have to change the entire system. And I think that he'd be willing to do that. But then Celtics fans are going to go from screaming that there's too many threes to screaming there's not enough threes.
Where are the threes? Yep,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's going to be like it'll be such a drastic swing because you don't want Giannis taking too many. You don't really want Brown taking too many, which means you're gonna overfeed Pritchard and probably Hauser, maybe Shyman as well, because Shyman has shown that he can hit them sometimes. Joe would have to adjust. And that would be a really big test of his coaching credentials. But if he could do that, if he could adjust and win with a different system for a year or two, all of the questions about one, his philosophy, and two, his credentials as an elite coach in the league would have to go away because then he's one with playing two completely different brands of basketball built around two completely different styles of team. That would be really interesting to see.
And we talked about so much how we wanted a rim runner with Tatum. I mean, can you imagine the pick and rolls and the lobs and stuff to the basket with Tatum and Giannis? Like, how do
And
you
the,
guard that?
the question is though, like, we said that about Giannis and Dame, and it just never materialized. And I know Dame isn't the version of Dame that we were hoping for, but to be realistic, and I hope I'm wrong here completely, we don't know what version of Tatum we're gonna get. So like, I don't want to kind of sell myself on that, even though I feel like Tatum's gonna bounce back in a Durant style and be elite. I'm not gonna buy into the Giannis Tatum pick and roll too tough. One, because it's probably never gonna happen, and two, because I don't wanna buy into it, like, on a super high level and then be crazy disappointed when we barely see it happen, because how many times have we spoke about how a Tatum and Brown pick and roll could look, and then it just rarely ever occurs?
Yeah, that's the one thing I kinda credit that to Brown, or discredit it to Brown, because for whatever reason, it's just not a way he feels comfortable playing. But whatever it may be, I mean, Giannis and Tatum, man, that would be it would be something really special. And another note, Giannis would be the same age as KG was when we acquired KG in '08.
See, there's an omen there that we could definitely look at, but what I'd want then is I'd want Giannis to be rooted to Minnesota for a year and then to pick him up from Minnesota just a little bit, like, before he change his age, and then I'm gonna feel really good about it. Okay,
Which
let's
scenario
play
do
the
you prefer, though?
I
Do you
prefer
prefer the Brown, keep Brown, or no Brown?
you see, it's tough, right? Like, so in a vacuum, I prefer to keep Brown, obviously. You prefer to have 3 incredibly elite guys on one roster. I just always worry about having too many mouths to feed and asking a guy to sacrifice on, like, an egalitarian offense like they did during 2024. That's one thing. Asking guys to sacrifice while other stars kind of take bigger roles, especially as everyone there's a champion, everyone there's an all-star, everyone there's been on an all NBA team. There's always the concern that it just doesn't work because there's just one too many guys that need the rock and need that ego stroke. You know what I'm saying? At that point, then that's why I lean more towards the trade brand to San Antonio. One, you get him out of the East, so you only have to see him twice a year. Then you only see him potentially in the NBA Finals. That's a scary prospect. Seeing a motivated Brown in the NBA Finals. But in return, you've got a clear 1-2 punch in JT and Giannis, and then the assets that you haven't had to send out to acquire Giannis, you've actually got more depth, which means you've got more longevity around that rotation. So I prefer that in terms of just logical team building, but in terms of fantasy building, I prefer to keep Brown, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
Where do you stand on it?
I want the show. I want the big 3. I think get talent first and worry about filling in the rest of the roles as it goes.
I just think there's so many cautionary tales about a big three, and it's not really what wins in the NBA these days.
But when it works, it's beautiful. We have a banner in '08. that shows that it does.
Yeah, but only one team with a big three has won since then, and that had LeBron.
It's true.
Do you know what I mean? And that's kind of where the caution, like the more teams fail with a big three than succeed, is kind of where I'm coming from here.
I can totally see that, and like I said, I do think a lot of teams are gonna try to copy the Pacers style where you have 9, 10 basically interchangeable guys, like, it doesn't matter if it's Neesmith, Nembhard, Mathurin, Toppin, like, they have, like, 5, 6 guys all on the same kinda tier level that when one comes out, there's no drop off, but it's like they don't have a top. I mean, I people are gonna say Halliburton's top 10. Nobody had Halliburton top 10 before these playoffs, but that's
Oh man,
fine.
Halliburton's fucking elite, dude. If you didn't have him top 15, then you were sleeping, in my opinion. I don't agree. Like Paul George was declaring him like the face of the NBA the other day. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but I'm a big Halliburton guy. I love pass per first guards, and that's exactly what he is. Now, where
Well,
were we?
somebody should tell, Tim Bontemps that because his one vote cost, Halliburton the conference final MVP. He lost
Yeah,
by
but
one vote.
Bontemps just fucking hater, dude. Um, where were
Shots
we? Yes,
fired.
I mean, dude, man, it is what it is, isn't it? That sounds super English now. It is what it is, isn't it? From there, though, I think that look, I understand the idea of building around the big three. I really do. But I think that when you look at the teams that have failed to do that versus the teams that have succeeded, the Celtics are really the only team that did it without an otherworldly, all generational talent. Because the only other two that have really done it are like Jordan and LeBron.
True.
In terms, so the idea that you could do it again as a Celtics and lightning strike twice, considering how many teams have tried and failed, as recently as Phoenix right now, trying to figure out how the fuck to get off of everything they've done. I'm just against it because I think that it's really difficult to make that type of team work, especially when all three guys are so close together in terms of tiering. Like Giannis is obviously like, who would be the best player on that team at that point? Who's your number one option, Giannis or Tatum?
It's a fun question. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean,
And then how does the guy that isn't number one adjust? Then Brown has to adjust from being a number two guy that feels like he should be a number 1A or 1B to being a number three guy. How does that work? Do you know? There's so many like behind the scenes questions that take place. I'm not a big fan of the big three model at all, to be honest. I do like the Pacers model. I think that's very clever. I also just like the idea of two good stars and then real legitimate depth.
yeah, the Pacers have something like we haven't seen in a long time. Like I think back maybe those old Kings teams in the early 2000s, they had like a bench mob where they could actually sub in literally like 4 or 5 guys that would kind of keep up the court with other team starters, or maybe the '04 Pistons. I don't know why all my thoughts are like early 2000s with this comparison, but it really is something we haven't seen in a long, long time.
And that leads us on. I want to kind of segue off this now, just hit this last topic and let everybody get up out of here. Talking of depth, talking of having interchangeability, the one thing the Celtics haven't had really is somebody that can, when Porzingis sits, you're running a different type of big, right? And I think Luke Cornett has been fantastic here. And I want to segue this by linking it back to the honest discussion in a moment. Luke Cornett's been brilliant, but Luke Cornett playing five out, he's had to become a development process, and now he's really figured that out. It's very hard to look at what the Celtics could get back for Kristaps and figure out how you're going to replace what he does. Now, and we spoke about this, I've wrote about this. My biggest takeaway right now is you don't replace what Porzingis does. You look to change it and go more rim pressure, rim running, lob threat above the rim, add some defensive kind of aggression that way. And as you mentioned, potential Giannis got traded to the Celtics. Would see him at the five. Would see JT Giannis pick and roll with a lob threat. I think we saw one of the best versions of Tatum's playmaking when he was alongside Rob Williams, when he's alongside somebody that can jump and just go get that shit. Do you think that if the Celtics decide to move on from Porzingis, and I've really struggled fucking threading the needle leading into this conversation, so if I've done well, people need to let me know in the comments because this was fucking hard. Do you think that moving on from Porzingis should lead to more of a rim running big, and you move away from having that floor space in five, just for the different look it's going to give you in the postseason because clearly Porzingis gave you the space, but he didn't really give you the scoring, and the Celtics were still just as impactful.
I think that's what you would target, but is that always gonna be possible? Sometimes you just have to take the best kind of player available and then let him kind of fit in the offense however he does. Like, if it is gonna be another another kind of 5 out kind of big, we can
There's
work
not
with that.
many of them anyway, right? Like, who would you go for as a 5 out? Like Vucevic, you could probably try and talk yourselves into, but he's a defensive liability. Who else is available that's a legitimate 5 out big? There's not many. I mean, we talk about how bigs are evolving. Brook Lopez is another one, but he's slow as shit at this point. You might as well keep KP. Who else would be available that's a floor space in five? Really? Like, could you talk yourself into Wendell Carter Jr.?
I mean, I always called him Baby Horford, so if he finally wants to come home and learn from, Mr. Miyagi, I would love that. I mean, Horford, take him under your wing and, like, you're gonna be fine. He has all the tools to be great, and for whatever reason, it's just hasn't clicked.
Never worked.
Nope.
Who else though? Who else is a floor space in five? Because I can name a bunch of rim runners that you could target this summer. Not a bunch, but a couple of decent high level guys. We're talking Jarrett Allen. Daniel Gafford is one that's been linked to the Celtics a bunch recently in potential Drew Holiday deals. Nick Claxton, you could probably talk Brooklyn into parting there, but the money would make it really difficult. There's a couple of like rim runners that you could go and look at and be like, yeah, this makes sense for us. But floor space in fives, I reckon if you sent Orlando a guard, then maybe you could like figure out how to bring back WCJ. But other than that, I'm not sure, man.
Yeah, I mean, I would love a little Drew Holiday swap for, Carter Jr., but that might even be an overpay. With some of the kind of rumors around Holiday, we might be able to get a nice little haul back. We might have to dream bigger.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, with WCJ, that sounds like an ideal fit. There's a couple of guys around the league that would make sense, but I do feel like going rim runner, or at least having that option on the bench. It doesn't need to be your starting big, and Nimi has kind of been that, but we haven't really seen him used that way. And we need somebody that's super explosive, very athletic, just gives you an above the rim presence. And I think sometimes that could be like such a momentum shift throughout a game. It can give you a completely different look. It can force the defense into some brand new rotations that make them uncomfortable. Having a rim running big come off the bench or even be in the starting five, I think, is very key to modern day NBA basketball. It gives you that pace, it gives you that tempo, that rim pressure. It creates kick out opportunities elsewhere on the floor. Boston love to lean into the short roll anyway. So just having a big that you can pass to on the short roll, he can kick out, and then someone can drive and throw the lob up for him. It makes sense to me that as an ideal addition to this rotation.
There's one guy that's kind of a combo of both. He'll give you some threes and he can give you, some, nice around the basket. He's gonna be available. I don't know what the heck Minnesota's gonna do, but Naz Reid's looking
Oh, yeah.
for a payday, and I don't know how that's gonna end because they have Julius Randle as well they're gonna have to pay. It could get really messy in Minnesota.
Naz Reid is arguably the best backup big man in the NBA, or in my opinion, a top three backup big in the NBA. Now, I don't know if you saw the interaction that got posted between him and a fan, but he's very adamant that he's going to be signing over 100 mil.
Yep, exactly. He's already
So,
counting those dollar signs, and that probably eliminates him from us because 'cause we're not gonna be in any sign and trade business or anything like that. But it is something to keep an eye on, and I always, threw the hypothetical out to my buddies, like, "Would you trade White for Reed if you could?"
and what was the answer?
We love the Buffalo, man. You can't trade the Buffalo. Derek White is so irreplaceable, man.
See, this is where I question, like, what would it take to bring Naz Reid? Now, obviously, it's a sign and trade; it won't happen. The reason it won't happen is because a sign and trade hard caps you at the first apron. So the Celtics would have to drop two whole luxury tax aprons just to even make that sign and trade. And then they're incredibly limited. So it's not going to happen that way. If Reed genuinely wants 100 mil, it's either 5 years at 20 or 4 years at 25. Those are your choices.
But
I
here's the
don't.
thing, I mean, we're still operating on, like, the for this year. The thing is Tatum's probably not coming back this year. he signs that contract, he's eligible to be traded after December. Maybe at the trade deadline, maybe next summer. It's just something to keep in mind because, like I said, I really don't expect this crazy tax bill from Minnesota. I just don't see it with this ownership.
So with that, if you could add, okay, if you had to replace Porzingis, who would be your ideal replacement?
Bam.
Bam would be your ideal replacement. That's a wild shift, though. Like a
I know.
completely different brand of basketball. You're adding like a proper playmaking hub into the equation there.
I think he would work so well with the Jays, and I know it's probably not possible with the Jays, but if those 3 somehow were able and, some, solid players around them, I think it would be really special. It would be a
Yeah, I
completely
think
different style of play, but man, defensively, we would have it on lock. I'd love him as an anchor, as a 3rd option. You don't have to rely on him for his offense. He doesn't have that first, first look special where he's like, he has all the pressure to be the guy. He's the 3rd option, like, and there would be no ifs, ands, or buts. Brown would get more looks than him, and obviously Tatum would. Everybody would know their hierarchy.
yeah, I'd like a Bam addition. I don't think Miami sign off on that. I also don't think they'd turn down an opportunity to make that discussion, though. They're in a position where Riley clearly wants to avoid a rebuild. We've heard his comments. He's very open to taking on veteran talents. He's very open to making moves. If you could do a deal that gave him enough assets to go star hunting, I don't think he would be wildly against it. I just don't know whether the Celtics have enough assets to give them for that, and whether the outgoing cost would be worth what Bam brings on the incoming. Although I do think that that would be a discussion worth having. I just Miami aren't going to be in a helping Boston get better business, and the Celtics aren't going to be in the helping Miami get a star business. That's the problem.
Exactly. It would take a lot of mutual respect that those franchises just haven't had.
I mean, I don't know how many people Riley actually respects.
No, but you know what? He's washed. He's in his 80s. He needs to go to the retirement home to stay on the boat, buddy, because it's over. It's not happening in Miami.
With me, I don't know who my ideal big would be. I mean, I used to think John Collins would be an answer, but he's just not been good at all in it by any stretch of the imagination. I'm gonna have to sit on that and really think about who there is around the league that would make sense for me as a long term solution at the center position. Obviously, we could be ridiculous and be like, I want Chet or I want I want Wemby, but being realistic, like I'm gonna want to sit on that for a minute or two and kind of really think about what big would make sense as a long term addition. Short term, if you don't keep Porzingis, maybe you do look at like a Vooch because you'd be able to play a very similar brand of basketball. I think Vooch will give you a lot more in terms of rebounding, but a lot less in terms of rim protection.
Yeah, the Vooch thing, I just don't see it. I
I
always
like
thought
Sabonis, but I just think Sabonis' defense, like Sabonis gives you a ton on offense, but almost next to nothing on defense. And that's not a Celtics big.
and he never plays well in big games, man. I know that it's the Kings, but they've had playoff opportunities, they've had games, even in like the in-season tournament, like they just never ever he just doesn't show up for whatever reason. He just shrinks when the spotlight's on him. And that just can't happen in Boston because you can't handle Sacramento where there's no chirping. How are you gonna handle the Boston fan base?
Where you're getting torn to shreds every day, like nonstop. You could win, and there's still going to be people tearing you down. With that being said, everybody make sure you subscribe to the Celtics Chronicle YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button now. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, hit that subscribe button. There's a new podcast feed. We've got no one, so you might be one of the first. Hey, and of course, make sure you're subscribing to the Celtics Chronicle newsletter. If you're a movie buff, then Billy's got you covered over on Letterbox. Is it Letterbox?
Yeah, Letterbox, man. CBO041. Bring Her Back. Best horror film in the last maybe 5, 10 years. It's a banger.
With that, we'll catch you all on Wednesday, everybody. Peace.